Okay, we're recorded and we're recording and ready to go. What we're going to look at today is specifically the, did I just lose it? There it is. We're going to be looking at today font formatting and styling. Some of this we've already covered in somewhat over the last couple of weeks, but today we're going to be looking at specifically the variations that we can use for formatting our text, the things that we can do with it, and so forth. With CSS, you can change the font, you can change the size, the weight, the slant, the height, the line height, the foreground, the background colors. You can change the imaging of it, the spacing, and the alignment of the text. And specifically, I just want to look at these this group of properties today. These are property values that we're going to be considering today: font style, font variant, font weight, font size, font height, and font family, as well as the font property, which is a shorthand for addressing all of these various attributes for fonts. So with the font family, this property, as you guys have already seen many times, it specifies the font for an element. So the font family property can hold several names, and these are what we call fallbacks. Now, the idea is that it'll do fallback from the fonts you specify all the way through system fonts. So for example, here we have a paragraph with an A class, and we have a font family specified for it. And you'll notice that the font Times New Roman, because it is space separated, there's actually spaces in the name, you have to put that font in quotes. So the very first font that would show up for this font family is Times New Roman. After that, it would fall back to Times, and then after that, it would fall back to a serif font. Serif is it's a generic family name type font for all fonts that are of type serif. Okay, whereas the font family Arial, Helvetica, these are all sans serif. Now I'll show you an image what I mean by that, because it'll make more sense in a moment. But let's just kind of look at, again, the general syntax. So we have a selector called body, and below it we have two other selectors, H1 and H2. And then we have our declaration block. The declaration block has our font family, and here we're only specifying one. Or you could specify a font family of, for example, Gill Sans, if you have that font on your system. The key thing to remember here is that you want to use fonts. If you're going to use system fonts, you want to use fonts that pretty much every computer user in the world would have. Otherwise, you're going to have to use things like web fonts and how to attach fonts to be downloaded. And we can get into that later. But if you do not have a web font, the system font you specify needs to be a font that's on their computer. So if you download off the web this really fancy font, and you're like, oh, I love this, look at this font, you make your web page with it, and you put your web page out there, but you don't include that font, or other users don't have that font, it's going to default to the system font, okay? And the system font could be whatever the browser has specified. So you want to make sure that you, in general, think ahead. What fonts would a Windows machine have, a iPad, an Android device? What are very similar fonts they would all have, okay? All right, so your font family property. There are two types of font family names. A family name is the name of the font family. So for example, Times is a font family name. Courier is a font family name, Arial, right? Then you have generic font family names like serif, sans serif, cursive, fantasy, monospace. Those are generic names. So again, you always start with the font you want and then end with a generic family font. This is the general rule. All right, so let's talk about serif and sans serif. In the previous example, let me go back up here a little bit. We have Times New Roman, Times, and serif. So serif is the generic font name, right? Times is a system font name, and Times New Roman is a specific font name. So you start from specific all the way down to the generic. Same thing down here. So you have serif, which fits in line with the Times New Roman, and you have sans serif that fits in line with Helvetica, Arial, and so forth. So if you look at what a sans serif font is, sans serif doesn't have the elegant or the curly features, okay? So sans serif. Sans is a word that means kind of without, is what sans means. So if we say sans serif, we mean without the serif. And the serif is literally that curl that you see on the font. That's kind of the origin of the name. So here you can see, this is basically a screenshot right off of, excuse me, I've got like bugs or something flying in here in the house today, a lot of gnats. If you see me waving crazy, I'm not going crazy. I'm just, well, I am going crazy trying to get the bugs away from me. But they're, you know, those little tiny little black gnats. Anyways, just ignore me if I'm waving my hands. So if you look here at this example, this is the serif with the sans serif, right? The serif with the sans serif. So this kind of gives you the demonstration of the differences between them. So if you specify your font and you end with a sans serif, then it is the system default version of whatever a sans serif font is. If you specify serif type fonts, then the serif at the end will be the last system generated font. Okay, let's move on. So this is something you need to keep in mind. For many of your input elements, input, select, text area, they don't in general take the font name that you've applied. So if you go into your CSS and you apply body and you say Helvetica, Arial, Tahoma, sans serif, it won't necessarily apply to your input, your select, or your text area, your form pieces. So in order to get them to do that, you have to tell them specifically font family inherit. And that will inherit then those pre-specified font styles. That's important to know. So make sure you note that down. All right, so let's look at another sample CSS here. So here we have a body selector, and we have a curly bracket for our declaration body. We have the font family, Geneva, Tahoma, sans serif, right? So we're saying that all of the body of the HTML will use this font, except for, of case, H1 and H2 are going to use Gil Sans MT, Calibri, and sans serif. But notice each of these both, they fall through to the last type of sans serif, right? Okay. Other types of things that you can do here is your italics. And generally, the way you specify italics in most browsers, you can use cite, you can use the EM, or the italics tag. However, it's becoming more and more appropriate to go ahead and just use a font style. The only time you really want to use cite, EM, or italics is if you have a particular type of text on the page that semantically matches the need. So for example, if you're citing a work, then you want to wrap it in the cite. Otherwise, if you need to use some type of italic or bold, you can say font style. If you want to remove the italic or bold, you would just say a normal. Let's dig a little deeper into it. So here again, we have a paragraph with a class A. That's our selector. We have the declaration block is font style is normal, which means that everything in this font is going to revert back to normal text, meaning it will be non-italicized or non-bold, right? In the paragraph B class, the font style is italics. And in the paragraph C class or paragraph Charlie class, the font style is oblique. Oblique is is another form of bold. All right, so your font styles, things that you could use, the syntax for this is normal, italic, oblique, initial, or inherit. So normal is the browser displays it as normal font. Italic is the browser displays it with an italic font. Italic is, the text leaning a little bit to the right. Oblique is the browser displays it with an oblique font style. Usually this is more of a bolder look. And initial is the property's default value, okay? As well, inherit, it tells it to inherit from its parent. So if its parent object is italicized and you just want to force the inheritance, then you use inherit. All right, any questions so far? Any questions? All right, we had someone just join the class. Who was that? I want to make sure I mark your attendance because was that Andrew?
Yes, sir. It was me.
Okay. All right. I want to make sure that you're listed as being present. Okay. So these are the different ways, of course, you can set the font and the font style. Let's go ahead and look at another example. This is when you want something to be bold. This is where you're going to use the font property, font weight. So font weight specifies the type of boldness of a particular piece of text, right? We're all familiar with bold when we look at, a word processing document like Microsoft Word. We look at it at the top, we have the big bold to make something really stand out, be highlighted. That's what the font weight property does for us. It gives us that bold. Now, there are several different predefined values we could use for bold. Font weight can go from any multiple of 100 up to 900. So 100 up to 900, where 400 typically represents a normal font weight. So you can actually take the weight and subtract weight by going below 400, right? You can make the text thinner and thinner and thinner by making the type start even as low as 100. 700 is typically the same value that we use when we say bold. And then we have even bolder, heavier names that we could use. All right. So now we get to another one, which is font size. We've all seen font size so far. Font size is basically specifying in pixels or in EMs or REM values. And we're going to talk about the pixel value, the percentage, the EM, and the REM. These are very important to use. And for the majority of the class, I'm going to encourage you to either use an EM or an REM value. You can use the PT value, but when you want your layout to be more expressive and size out and stretch to the appropriate size of the screen, the EM and the REM are more appropriate. Okay, so here we have a font size property set to set for these different sizes. We have a div, and it's referencing a class A, And this is set to what we've seen so far, a font size of 15 pixels. You can also use a named size, which is large. Now, the name size large will pretty much, it will map to a system default. And you can change that system default, of course, with your CSS. Let me look it up here and give you the exact measurement of what large is. Looking at your textbook, guys, can anyone find that for me? What large actually represents? Does anyone see it?
I'm opening my textbook, sir.
Let's see here. It's actually, I think I've misprinted this. The keyword here is larger, not large. And so when we use the relative keyword larger, the idea is that these will use a percentage of the value and become larger. Whereas if you use the keyword smaller, it will use a percentage of the overall value and become smaller. And then, of course, you can use things like the percent. So we can say that it's going to be 150% size, right? Okay. Let me jump back in my textbook here real quick. Oh, excuse me. All right. So I just threw up a bunch of stuff up on the screen here for you. These are all of the available properties and standard types of values that they're looking for. So you can have a font size of medium, a font size of extra, extra small, of extra small, of small, of large, extra large, extra, extra large, and then of course smaller and larger. And then you have other values that you could apply, like the length. And the length could be a pixel, it could be a cm. These are you can read, of course, you can read about those links if you go to WW Schools. You can read about them, or you can use the percent, which sets the font size to percent of the parent's element font size. So what does that mean? That means if my body selector is set to, say, 15px, I can say, give me for this particular page a percent, and it will take the percent of whatever the body is, because the body is the parent, and it'll set that size to that percentage, right? And then, of course, you have an initial and inherits. All right, so let's look a little bit deeper here. With this sample CSS that you're looking at, you have an EM tag, you have an anchor tag, and it's referencing a pseudo class of link, as well as you have the intro and the subhead classes. All of these are set to a font weight of bold. And then you have the H1, which is a font size of 35 pixels, right? 35 pixels. The H2, a font size of 28 pixels. The intro class and the subhead class are set to a font size of 18 pixels. The intro class with the paragraph is set to a font size of 17, and project and paragraph size 15, right? These are various ways that you would size, typically, your page, right? Specify all the things that you want similar in a particular font style, and then everything else you would size appropriately. If we continue to look at this here in this sample, we have the body selector, and we're telling the body selector to have a font family of Geneva, Tahoma, Urbana, sans serif, which means all of these don't have the curl, the serif. And we're saying the font size is 100%. or of what the system would be, which is 16 pixels. Okay. Now, once we set that, we're going to come down to H1 and H2. We're going to set the font family for these as Gill Sans, Calibri, Sans Serif, and we set a font weight. And then we come over to our font size for H1. Notice what H1 has. H1 has a font size specified in decimal, and it ends with an EM. Okay. In general, the way that you work your EM sizes is they are the overall font size divided by 16. So if you do the math, let's just do this real quick. I'm not good with doing the numbers in my head, right? So we have 35 px divided by 16, which we know is going to be 2.18. But again, let's say that your font size is 30. So we would say 30 pixels divided by 16. And that would give us a font size, an EM of 1.875. Whereas this one is a 35 pixel, right, divided by 16. Now, in these examples, I recommend to actually put the math that you're using. What the EM gives you is the flexibility of allowing your page to grow and contract without having these sizes being static. So 35 is going to be, let's see, 35 is going to be the max size. And for the H2, 28 is going to be the max size. And then we're saying divide that by the 16 pixels, okay? So this is how you'd use your EMs, When I'm talking about EM here, I'm talking about the size calibration definition, okay? Versus a tag of EM. This EM tag is different than the unit of measure here. Everyone understands that, right? Okay. All right, so we have a body here specified, Geneva, sans serif, font size 100%, and we put into our comments here to let ourselves know what that would be. So our comment here is that it's 16 pixels. Now, this is important because whatever you specify in the body is going to be the font size that's relatively used for your EMs. So if I specify 2.1875 EM, it's based off relatively to whatever the parent is, right? So,
Okay.
I'm sorry?
Nothing.
Oh, okay. So the font size is 100% will be set to the relative font size of 16, right? That's what this means. And your browsers are going to know this. They're going to interpret it. So for yourself, you just have to remember that. However, if you set this size up here to something static, it's going to use that as the interpretive value in determining your font size down here. EM font sizes are relative to the body using the size. And this, again, this is the equation. So you have your desired size divided by the parent size. Your parent is up here, right? This is your parent size. And this will equal your EM. It's always recommended, well, it's highly recommended. You don't always have to do it this way, but it's highly recommended for flexible layouts that you use EMs instead of absolute pixels. Okay, any questions so far? Okay, we're going to have an opportunity to kind of play with this later. Excuse me. We'll have an opportunity to play with this later when we're looking at our homework assignment. So again, here is a sample. 15px divided by 16 will give us the 9.375 EM value. Okay. All right, so let's talk about what an REM. An REM is your root EM value, okay? Your root EM value. There was something in the text I wanted to bring out to you guys. Let me see if I can find it here real quick. Well, we'll come back to it. We'll come back to it. All right. So when you're thinking about your root EM, again, this is very similar to your EM. It's really just the name, honestly. So it's sized to the root HTML directive. In the other example, I was using the body, but if I set the root to 100%, then the REM is going to work off of the HTML, the root. Your HTML selector is always the root because that is the top level of your document, right? So in this example, we have an intro class and a paragraph, and the font size is 17px, right? And then we can also specify font size 1.0625 REM, which is 17 divided by 16 pixels. Now, why would we do this? The primary reason why you would specify two different pixel dimensions here is if the browser that you're using or the user, your customer, whoever that might be, they don't have an up-to-date browser. So for example, Internet Explorer 9 does not support REM. You may be asking, Mr. Rogers, why do I care about that? Everyone should be using the latest browser. Well, everyone has a grandmother too, or an auntie, and sometimes they don't use the most up-to-date technology. And you may get frustrated when you're like, Grandma, come on, update your browser, update and get the latest, right? But you have to go with the assumption that there are people like that out there everywhere. And they don't understand that they need to update their browsers and update their systems normally. So the way you handle that to give those individuals the best experience, as well as it could be for the company that you work for, there may be, for example, I worked for the Department of the Army for a number of years. In the 10 to 15 years that I bounced back and forth working for them, they had very strict rules on what browsers they would allow on their machines. And it had to do with system updates and so forth. And so they were very protocol oriented of what updates were coming through. At the time, the Department of the Army was only using Internet Explorer 8, and the rest of the world was using 9, 10, 11, right? But we had to support our websites that we wrote to at least run on IE8. So you have to think about that. You have to make sure that you're writing your code to be expressive for even the folks out there who have the lowest browsers, all right? So we're using the fallback principle. I specify the font size is 70 pixel, and if their browser supports it, it will fall through to this one. If they don't support it, it'll stay 17 pixels, right? Here, we set the font size to 16 pixels. If their browser supports it, it'll go to a font size of 1 REM, right? And again, in the quotes, I'm just kind of putting what this would have been to make it easier for myself to come back and remember. Always use your commenting facilities that are available to you, because sometimes you're not going to want to be able to break out your calculator and figure out what the exact dimensions were. You just want to be able to look at it and move on. All right, any questions so far with what I've touched on? Any questions? Okay, let's go ahead and jump forward here. So the next one is the line height. The line height is different than the other font textual properties. The other font properties, I'll say font dash style, font dash variant, font dash weight, font dash family, and then you get to line height. It's out of the blue. It's completely different. They didn't say font line height. They just called it line height. So your line height, this refers to the paragraphs leading, which is the amount of space between each line in the paragraph and the line below it, right? So using a large line height can sometimes make the body of your text easier to read. Now you can see here on this, this Google slide that I'm using, there is a line height. If I squish the line height, I can actually bring the text up on top of each other, and then that makes it very difficult to read. So your line height gives you that flexibility in your pages for reading it. Okay, so some examples again on line height. So we have an intro class, and we have a line height specified of 1.45, right? 1.45. And we have a intro with a subhead with a font size of 1.25. Now this again is going to use the default metric. If the body is set to 100%, right? It's going to say that it's going to take 16 pixels divided by, if you multiply that back, you'll get your, whatever the actual pixel is, right? This one here, font size of 1.625. If you wanted to figure out what the exact pixel is again, take 16, multiply it times that, and that would give you the inverse of what your division was. Okay, so you have a project P class, font size set to 0.9375, excuse me. And you have a line height of 1.65, right? And what they're trying to show here in the slide is the definition for how you get that 1.65 would be 2475 pixels divided by your font size, which is 15px. And that would give you your 1.65 for your line height. You guys didn't think you're getting into math today, did you? Like, oh, not math again. Ugh. It's not bad. It's just simple multiplication, simple division. All right. Any question, guys? If you're awake, wave your hand at me. Okay, I see 2 people awake. The rest of you, are you awake? Or at least smile at me then, because then I can see the smiles, right? Okay, there we go. Some of you look kind of goofy when you smile. All right, here we go. Let's moving on. So you got your font property. Okay, now your font property is one of these outliers. You're like, what in the world is a font property? A font property is the shorthand methodology for specifying all of the things that we just looked at. So you can use your font property to talk about in one line a font style, a font variant, a font weight, a font size, the line height, and the font family. You can do it all in one go. That's what the font property is. It is the shorthand property for it. All right, so how do we use it? Well, let's say that you have a paragraph and you have a alpha class here and you specify the font. So think about the syntax. You're specifying a size and a family. Now, this is down here at the bottom, this is the syntax. So what you would usually define is first the italic, then the variant. Variant would be like small caps, right? Large caps. That's what font variant is. Then it would be font weight. So here we have the bold. Then the font size, 12px divided by 30px. Or the line height, and that's, excuse me, they're doing the line height right here by doing that division. Then they get down to the font family. Now there's other CSS syntax that you could apply here. You could apply caption, icon, menu, message box, small caption, status, bar, initial, inherit. Initial and inherit, those are pretty much the same across all CSS properties. I'm not going to get into caption, icon, menu, message box, but if you're interested in those, you can go look those up. All right. So again, let's go back to this example. So we have to follow the order. So we start with the font size. So we have the font size, and then we specify the font family. And you can see that the next thing in the order is the font family. So this is the syntax. This is kind of, if you decide to use font as a shorthand property, it's good to know this syntax because it is a sequence of order that you have to follow. All right. You guys
So
need
font
to
style and font variant, font style through font family, they're weighted the same?
what do you mean?
Like, I can instead put font variant first and then font style, then font size, then font weight?
No, you'll have to follow this order: font style,
Okay,
and then
that order.
font variant, and then, because this is a shorthand property, and so it's expecting that the values are going to be laid out in a particular order. And if it doesn't see the expected value, then what it does is it falls through to the next expected one. So for example, here, font, it could either give you font size or line height, right? But in this one, it could expect font style, doesn't see that. So it falls to font variant, it doesn't match that. It goes to font weight, still doesn't match. And then it gets to font size and it goes, aha, the computer, the code, right? It recognizes it and it breaks it down. Now, from a software development perspective, this makes sense because computers will only do what you tell it to do. They only follow the rules that you tell them to do. And these rules are important. Otherwise, the programming that's behind the scenes, the programming that each browser uses, it can't follow the syntax. And in general, that's how all of these specifications work. The World Wide Web community, the W3C, they publish the specification, and then the browsers, the companies that write the code for the browsers, they look at the specification and go, oh, so for the font, shorthand font family, I have to write the specification, excuse me, to interpret the code in this order, right? That's just kind of a behind the scenes how all this works. And it means that we have to, we want to follow those rules as well, unless they come out with other patterns to work around it, which right now they don't. They don't come out with other ones. But if you're like in my Java class, you then could write rules to interpret this syntax. You could think about, well, how would I write? Omar was in my Java class, so he would, his mind may be turning, or he might be over there puking. I don't know. So I don't even know. Is he paying attention? Oh, okay. All right. Let's go ahead and jump forward again here. Color. I thought it was appropriate, or maybe ironic, to make the screen without color, just to keep it all plain. So color, we talked about color before. You have the predefined color names: blue, green, orange, red, pink, yellow. There are some variants, and some browsers do have a larger list of variants that you can use for those predefined color names, but you want to stay within the standard list. Then, of course, you can specify a color by the RGB. So, for example, here's an example using the hexadecimal. We have the pound sign, the 7, the D. So remember, these two are groups, right? This is a group, and I think I'm missing one. 1, 2, 3, 1. Oh, no, it's just 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. All right. So the alternate way you could do that is by specifying the exact numbers from 0 to 255. So if you remember, what column is this first one, guys?
Right.
Ah, yeah, you cheated, right? Because you looked at the acronym. Oh, you didn't cheat. Second one then would be green. The third one would be blue, right? RGB. All right, so that's the standard way you can specify colors. And really, this is the easiest way to do it. If you think about how you can specify your hues, you can come up with a lot of different patterns of colors that way. The other one is the HSL. So the H stands for hue. The S stands for what? You guys remember?
Saturation.
Saturation. And the L is?
Lightness.
Light. There you go. So if you think about your hue, you have a number between 0 and 360. You have the saturation of 0 to 100 and the light value of 0 to 100. And that's how you could specify colors using the HSL. Then you have the RGBA and the HSLA. Now, the A for both of these stands for, do you guys remember? It's not the omega. It's the
alpha.
The alpha. There you go. So this is referring to your transparency, your opacity. So you can make your color transparent using that number. And that number is a number between 0 and 1. Hence why I've got right now just 0.5. The higher you get to 1, I'll be honest, I can't remember. I always get this confused. Does anyone remember off the top of their head? Is 1 transparency, complete transparent, or is 0 solid?
I think 0 is solid, and then the more you put, or the higher value you get, is the more transparent.
Okay. Yeah, I'm as a software developer, I don't remember all the details. I remember someone telling me they were talking about Einstein, and Einstein, they said, do you remember all the phone numbers? And he said, no, that's what phone books are for. He never remembered a single phone number. He always just wrote them down so you could always reference them later. And generally that's what we have to do as well in software development, in web development. There's a lot of properties. Hopefully you'll learn all the properties that become second nature to you, but if you're not using them every day, you need to have a good reference to be able to come back to these. Okay, and then again, HSL, same as up here, but the A is the alpha, the transparency. You use the color property then in the syntax of color, colon, and one of those 5 options. Okay, one of those 5 options. And those 5 options then give you quite a bit of flexibility for the colors that you can display on a page. Any questions about the color property? You guys know where to use the color property, right? Where would you put the color property?
In CSS?
Martin, that's true. Maybe I should be more specific. That was on me. Where do I put the color property in my CSS?
Font color, is it?
Yeah, I would put it next to the font, right? But it's going, the color property is always going to be for a font. It's always going to measure for a font. It's never going to set, if you use the color property, it's never going to change an image. It's never going to change a background. It's only for textual pieces of information. So if you think about all your text elements on the page, your H1s, your H2s, right? Color will also affect your input boxes, your form elements, okay? That's where you'd use color. All right, and now we get to background. So if color is the text itself, sometimes we call color the foreground, right? And what's behind it, we call it the background. So we have many different properties here. We have the background color. We have background image. We have background repeat, background attachment, background position. And we have the shorthand. All right. So let's talk real quickly here about the background. So with a background color, you can use things like transparent, and you can make the background color transparent. And then you would specify the RGB, the RGBA, or the HSL, or the HSLA. So say I had a background color, say I wanted the background color to be, red. How would I do that? I'd use the same RGB, same hex, same HSL, or I would use the color name, right? So I could specify that the background of a div is going to be red. I could specify that the body of a page would be red, or I could specify the root, right? The whole page, the HTML is going to be red. Now, I don't recommend you making your page red unless you have some type of stylistic thing you're going for. But the background color then is typically done usually in hex, right? It's usually done in hex. So let's talk about, let's see. Let me see here. Let's talk about the next one, the background image. For background image, let me edit this actually. Can y'all still see this? For the background image, you typically use the URL, and then you specify the path to your image, right? This is the way you would specify the background image. Now, the other properties that go with this, like repeat, repeat will have a additional property, additional values that only address if you have an image. So to make this more clear, I'm going to go ahead and open up my Atom browser for a moment. Again, I want to encourage you just to go ahead and open up your Atom text editors, because it'll make it easier for you to follow along with me. I'm going to go to the same sample class I've been going to for a while now. Let's see. I've got a website, right? And I've got a style CSS here. And I'm going to go ahead and open a new tab. Whoops. There we go. Okay, so I've got this sample text here. You probably saw this from the video we did earlier. I'm going to wipe out my CSS for a second. And let's see here. This is annoying me a little bit. Let me bring that down. There we go. And then I have this div here. I'm going to just take out all of this. And we'll start with an article. And I'm going to give this a class of my background image. And inside of this, I'm going to have an H1, latest news, and we'll have a paragraph tag. What's happening in the CNMI? All right, so we'll refresh this. Basic HTML, right? I'm going to go out and grab a background image real quick. Let's see, CNMI map. There's got to be some good maps out there. Let's see. That'll work. All right, so I'm going to grab this one. And it's a JPEG, so I'm going to navigate to my NMC folder, CSS. And I'm going to put it in my images folder. And map, let's see, CNMI map. And it's a JPEG. So we save it. Okay. If I look in my images, I should see it. There it is, right? Okay, so I want that image to show up as a background over here. Now, the way that we would do that is we would go to our CSS, and I'm going to specify my, let's see, what was the name of our class? My background image, right? So my background image. So I have my selector specified. Now I'm in my declaration. And I'm going to say background image URL. And always remember this, path is important. Notice where my CSS file is at. It's in the CSS folder, right? But where is my image at? It's in the images folder. So think about what you have to do here. ... to go up. Then I can say images / CNMI - map JPEG, right? And we'll put the semicolon at the end. All right. And there we go. It's now populated that, that background image to fit just inside of my text, right? Now, honestly, my text here is kind of ugly. So let's go ahead and practice a little bit what we've done so far. I'm going to specify a body tag. And in my body tag, I'm going to have a font family. And I'm a fan of sans serif. So I'm just going to say sans serif, right? Remember, this is a generic font, and so I'm going to tell the browser to pick whatever the default is for that browser. I refresh it, it's changed the font, right? So what are some other things that I could do here? Well, let's go ahead and say for my H1 and my paragraphs, I'm going to have a color of white. So refresh it. And yeah, maybe not, right? Doesn't work out the best, but it's getting there. All right. So we've stipulated a little bit here. I'm going to change this to maybe yellow. Maybe yellow would work better. Maybe not. We'll figure that one out later. Our styles, I may not be styling. All right, so let's think about this a little bit here. I have my background image specified using the URL, and what is something else that I might want to do here? Well, let's look at my index HTML. In my index HTML, I have this background image, right? Well, maybe I want to do something else. Maybe I want to put a div in here, and I want the div to wrap around all of that. And I want this to be, let's see, I want this to be my overlay. All right. If you remember in Atom, you can always beautify your editor contents by right-clicking, right? And that will reformat and put everything a little nicer. All right, so I've added a div to wrap around this. If I refresh it, it's not going to do much. So let's go back to my style. And I'm going to say, reference my class, my overlay. So my dash overlay. I have a background image, but what if I had a background color? Right? Now, I'm going to tell you what I want to do, and I think I've already made a mistake. Some of you, if you can figure out what the mistake is I made in order of precedence, what I want to happen is I want to put kind of an opaque, lightish gray over top of this background image. So think about that, okay? So I'm going to specify an RGBA and 255, 255, 255, let's say 0. Refresh it, what does it give us? Not much, right? So let's do padding. And we're going to do 20px, 20px. So that upped our padding, but I'm not seeing my overlay, right? Well, let's think about what we did here. I bet you we probably need to swap this. Let's say Not getting my overlay. What do y'all think I need to do here?
Isn't it because it's at 0, your transparency, that you're not going to see any change?
Let's test it and see. No. So let's make sure. This is always a good testing mechanism. Comment out something. So there it is, right? So I know if I comment it out, that is my size. Well, let's change this up a little bit. Let's change the my overlay to have a height of 100%. Right? So that's not giving us what we want either. This is this is in general the process of what you have to do to troubleshoot and work through things. So just kind of work with me here and let's think about it. I've got background image, right? I want to make my what I'm doing semantically correct. So I'm going to swap this here. There we go. That's progress, right? So if we go back to our style, 0.5. See what we're doing? We're applying an overlay now over top. Let's change the color a little bit more and see what we get. There we go. We're going down to maybe a 5, right? So we're applying the color to play around the background color as an overlay, the background color over top of this overlay. And that gives us a little bit of a way of stacking elements using the background. So now I'm going to change my color to white and save it. And that's more readable, right? It makes a little bit more sense. So this is one way we can use the background image. All right, so let's talk about the background image. The background image here is in this div, in this area. So if I just copy this and go crazy, copy and pasting, save it. And you can see that it is growing the image to reveal more of the background, right? So let's talk about this though. We have a my background image, and inside of that div we have a P class. Well, maybe we want all of the textual elements inside the my background image, inside the div, to be inside a little bit more. How would we do that? What would we do? Think about that for a second. maybe we could say div P or div H1 and P, and then do a padding 20 pixels. See how we did that? Now, we haven't talked a lot about padding yet. You may have noticed that in some places I use padding where I'll do 20, 20. In some places where I'll use 20, 20, 20, 20. Or if I just specify it one time. We'll get into this later, but with the padding property, if you specify the size one time, it equally puts the padding on all four sides. If you specify it two times, it only puts the padding on the left and the right. And similarly, if I do this up here, if I say padding 20px, 10px, 10px for margin, notice what happens. I've changed, well, let's do that again. Yeah, it's taking that last value because it's falling through. There you go. So it takes the last value. All right, so let's talk about the next item in this. Now my map of the CNMI, it's kind of taking up the whole thing, but maybe I want a small image, just a small image. Let me find, how big is that? That's still pretty big, isn't it? Let's find a Saipan flag icon. I'm afraid most of these are going to be ginormous, so it's going to not work to our advantage, but let's see, that's 12 by 1200. Oh, that's smaller. Okay, that one might work. So let's see, we'll save the image as to our CNMI flag. This is again, it's a JPEG. So if I click on it, that's pretty small. I think it's got all this background fuzziness in it though. Let me do something real quick. I'm gonna just fix it so we can work through this real quick. Okay, that's better. All right, so I'm going to use this image, and now I'm going to demonstrate how we would use this, spreading it across the screen, what would happen. So let's go ahead. I'm going to create a brand new article. And this is going to be, oh, this is a hot topic. Politics. Everyone loves that one, right? No? Does anyone have family who's politicking right now? No? Okay. Well, my wife has family who's politicking. It's always, yeah, I'll just leave it at that. All right. So let's, oops, H1, just going to call it politics. And I have a p tag, and I need some text. So I'm going to go out here and go to the Ipsum generator and just grab some text to make it spread out a little bit. Okay. All right, so if we come back here, if we refresh this, nothing is showing. Why do you think nothing is showing? Anyone know? It's there, but you can't see it. You know why?
It's transparent.
Well, it's sort of it's not really transparent, but look at the CSS and tell me what I've specified. Here, I'll help you out a little bit. So we got this text right here. You see it now? So it shows up now, but think about why it shows up white down here.
The image isn't big enough.
Yeah, so the image up here is not large enough to show up. So what I want to do is I want to say something about politics, P, let's see, H1 and P, and I want to give it a color that I can see, which for our purpose could just be black, right? Because it'll show up fine against white. So now if I refresh it, now it shows up. Now look again, think about how this is working, right? So here's my index. I have the article up here, and then I have another article of politics. This text is showing up white. This one is showing up black, right? Notice how it's defined up here. This H1P color is white. This one is black because I specify it by the politics, okay? All right, so let's look again real quick before we use our next background image. We have the article politics, pretty nice big area here. And we're going to go over here and just do this. We're going to say dot politics background image URL / images, and then we're going to specify the CNMI flag, called it 260 by 200.jpg. All right. Remember to put my semicolon at the end. Make sure I've got everything spelled right. Okay, so I'll refresh it. And notice what happened. Why is it that up here, my image doesn't do the same thing it's doing down here? Think about that. What do you think is happening?
Class separation.
There is a certain amount of separation that's at work here, but there's also something to do with the size of the image. When you're using the background image, if the size is not if the size is not bigger than the size of your textual element, what happens is that it actually will repeat, right? It'll repeat. Something else is interesting here. I'm going to take this and just merge these two together because I want my stuff up top to still be white. There. Ah. I have to play around with that. All right, so how do I deal with it? Well, if I don't want the images to repeat a certain way, I have to specify a new property. So I'll say background dash repeat, and I say no repeat. And if I say no repeat, there you go. It only shows up one time. However, I can do a lot of interesting things here. I can specify a direction of the repeat. I can specify for it to repeat in an X-Y axis. I can tell it to do many, many, many things here. So for example, I could say repeat X. And if I tell it to repeat X, it's only going to go this way. If I tell it to repeat Y, it's only going to go that way, right? So these are some of the things that you can do. Additionally, I can say things like this. I can add a third property here, and I can say background position, and I want it to be only left and bottom. Now let's see. Let's do that first. Change the axis. So now it's on the left and the bottom. It didn't repeat at the top. Or I could tell it right top. Right? And so it's starting from here and repeating from the right to the left. Whereas if I go left top, it will repeat from here over to the right. Okay? A lot of interesting things that you can do there. So that is the use of the background image, right? The other thing that you can do is the background attachment. The background attachment. Now, let's play around with that for a second. So we're going to leave the position, take the position, no, we'll leave the position as it is. And we'll say background attachment fixed. So this is going to stick the background image to the browser window. What that means is if I decided to scroll, the image, well, I lost it. Where did it go? The idea behind it is that the image would actually stay put. I think we have to do it like this. That's not gonna. What are we missing? You guys know what we're missing? I think it's because of the size. So the idea with background attachment is what it does is it fixes the image to the background so that if my text was long enough, when I scroll, the image doesn't move, but the text moves over it. You've probably seen it on some sites. I think in this instance, I have to have a whole lot more text to get that to work. Let me see here if I can. mess something up here? Huh. We'll come back to this. All right. Any questions so far, guys? Any questions? Okay. There are a couple other things here in your textbook. For example, you can specify what we've already done with the background color, transparency. You can set, of course, the letter spacing. That's the other one. I think we'll get into letter spacing on Thursday, though. Now, I do want to remind you, this week we actually have 2 chapters. With that, I want to switch over real quick and go ahead and pull up your Moodle Classroom. And if you look at week 6, we have, you'll notice that there is no discussion forum this week. No discussion forum this week. For the midterm quiz, I haven't looked at this in a while, but I believe the midterm quiz is only up to chapter 9. It doesn't include this week's material. Has anyone taken the quiz yet, the midterm? Okay, your midterm is due by the end of this week. So please make sure that you do that midterm quiz. It's open notes. It's, it shouldn't be that difficult for you. It is timed, so you do need to abide by the timing of it. So we have a chapter 8 homework assignment this week. And it is frozen up on me. Let me close that and come back into it. Canvas does this to, Moodle does this to me quite often. Okay. Come on. All right. So we have the homework 8 assignment this week. This is over chapter 10. Just download the homework 8 zip. You're going to modify the style sheet, and it's very basic. And then you have chapter 11. You have to do the assignment for that this week. So there is 2 chapters. There is no discussion forum this week, though. All right. Okay, let's go ahead and open up the chapter 8 homework assignment. And I'm going to close these windows here. And okay, go ahead and open your zip file for this. I'm going to make sure it's renamed so it doesn't. In your chapter 10 homework assignment, you should have a Word document and 2 HTML files. You should have a CSS with the EM and the pixel, and you have plenty of images. All right, so let's go ahead and open the document. So this assignment is to modify the homework chapter 10 PX in the file CSS folder. So you have to modify the CSS there. Convert all EM files in the chapter 10 PX file to, you're going to convert all the EMs to pixel. Okay? So it's just math, right? Shouldn't be difficult. So you just have to break out your calculator and do that. Okay? Now, let me pull up the text again so you guys will know where to look. If you have your textbooks in front of you, let's see here. It's going to be under the section setting the font size. And of course, we've already done this, but setting the font size in your textbook, chapter 10. You want to set your body to 100%. And by doing that, it's going to set a default size of 16, right? So if you look at the PX, you're going to convert all of the EMs to PXs. If you look at that, you should see, here's your body. We got a font, we got a simplified font property, right? We've set it to 100%. So now we need to convert this font value to a pixel. So how would you do that? Think real quick. Do you remember?
Would you multiply it by the 16 or like the default, or I forgot what it's called, but yeah.
Yep. So this font here is 1.375 EM. We're going to convert it to standard font size. So 1.375 EM would be what PX size? Do you guys know?
16.
Well, you're going to use 16, but what would be the final font size? So this is the reverse of division, right? So with the reverse of division, it's multiplication. So you take the 16, you multiply it times 1.375, and you should come up with a number.
22.
Yeah, 22. So make sure you convert the 22, right? You put 22 PX, right? Let's look at the definition here. You're going to convert all of the EMs, so you have the line spacing. Now there is a value for line spacing as well. You remember the calculation for line spacing? I'm going to put this in the comments here so we don't forget. This is, let's see here. So it is 1.375 EM times, big times, 16 PX equals 22 PX. Okay. The conversion of the unit conversion will automatically be PX when you're multiplying the, only when this is 100%. Okay. If this body is changed to something else, then this value will be different. All right. All right. So what is for line spacing? What is the calculation? So we're assuming that the body is 16 pixels, just like the font size. And this means that for EM, say 0.4 times 16 would give us a line spacing of 6.4 pixels, right? So 0.4 EM times 16 px, that gives us a line height of 6.4 pixels. Okay, so go ahead and work through this. Remember that what the rule says, you're converting the EMs, right? Converting the EMs to pixels. And you're going to save it, make sure it looks right. When you're done, if you compare between the original and after the translation of the values, they should look identical. If they don't look identical, then you need to check your math. All right. Go ahead and look at the other one. So the other assignment, let's see, where is it at? Yeah, I think one is the before and the one is the after. Okay, so after you do that, that's just for assignment 10. Okay, that's for assignment 10. All right, any questions on the assignment? It's very basic. It's not,
Nope.
It almost feels like elementary school, like seek and find. It's like, wow, this is college class, huh? Yeah. Very basic. You should have no problem figuring this out. All right, let's go ahead and go back to Moodle one more time. That's your chapter 8. Your chapter 11, homework assignment 9, we're going to do together on Thursday. So don't stress out yet, unless you're just super aggressive with wanting to study and get into it, and you push all the way through the chapter and you just want to get done for the week. You can do that as well. Okay. We have a little bit of time left, so let's go ahead and jump back and look at word spacing for a moment. Okay, look back at your word spacing. We can go ahead and, let's see, don't save, close, close, close. I'm going to take out some of this. And where's my style? I'm going to take out F politics, so we'll leave the politics in there. We'll make that gray. Okay. See, I'm tempted now that we have plenty of space to put that back in. Let's see, background. Attachment is fixed. There you go. You can see it now moving across the screen. See that? Okay, so that's fixed. All right, so let's talk about your line spacing. So your line spacing, let's talk about your word spacing. Your word spacing is the space between the words. Sometimes this is also called your kerning. It's a fun word, kerning, Kerning. For your letters, and for your words, it's called tracking. So for your letters, we call it kerning, Kerning, and for your words, we call it tracking. All right, so when we want the letter spacing to be a particular way, we just apply, for example, we'll say let's just only put this on our P class. Our P selector. We'll set a letter spacing of 7px. All right, so what is that going to give us? If we refresh that, 7px spreads the letters out to an abominable fixed length, right? That's kind of hard to read. But let's make it even worse. Let's go 25px. I imagine this could be really annoying for a lot of websites, but this gives you flexibility when, say, you want only certain things to be addressed. So let's put that back in. Oops. And we'll add H1. And so the H1 now is only going to address just this top letter, the politics. So refresh it, and there we go. It changed to politics. I'm going to change this back to black and make it stand out a little bit better. All right, so there we have it. So you can address the kerning. This is the letter spacing of your of a particular word. When you're wanting to address the spacing between words, the word spacing, you'll use the word spacing property. So let's go back to our style. I'm going to go down to the P and use word spacing, and I'm going to give this a 5-pixel word space. And what that'll do is it will actually, in between every word, it'll give you that spacing, the 5 pixels, right? The length of these are as well in number units. So you could specify if your body has a font size of 100%. You could specify these in EMs. So if I want an EM of whatever that is, let's see, I'm just going to mark this so we remember. 25 divided by 16px is going to equal our size, and that's going to be what? Let's see, 25 divided by 16. It's going to give us a 1.5625 EM, right? And if I refresh it, if I did my math right, it should be the same. It is the same, right? Same thing for word spacing. As long as my font size appears specified to 100%, it's going to use the 16 pixel, and it gives us that flexibility. So we'll say 5px. My commenting here is not very good, is it? I'll make the comments reflect what it should be. 5px divided by 16px. And of course, 5px, if you guys are quicker than me, you might come up with it quicker. 0.3125 EM. So that gives you your word spacing as well. and it's exactly the same. All right, so that is your word spacing and your letter spacing. You can as well use other things in here. You can also use normal or zero. And of course, zero is going to set it back to normal. So for example, if we just, I'm going to add another comment here to block that out. We'll just say normal. And that's the letter spacing. And, oh, it's up here. Yeah, there it is. That's the letter spacing went back to normal. Whereas likewise, you can do zero. And of course, that's normal. But if we take it back out, we can go back to the original letter spacing. Your letter spacing and your word spacing can also be affected by things like text align. So if we say, text alignment here is justify. What justify does is it forces the letters to be equidistantly spaced across the available window. So in this scenario, I have starting from here all the way to here, this line would be spaced. So if I refresh it, it's going to affect, of course, that word spacing. It changes the word spacing. So text align will overwrite some of this word spacing, right? All right. The other thing we can do is adding indents. So think about your indents for a moment. Say we want the first line to be textually indented. So we would come up here and I'm going to take out this justify, this text align. With the text indent, again, you're going to be using PXs or EMs, right? And so I have 100% up there. If I want this to be a 20 pixel space indent for my paragraph, that means that the first line is going to indent 20 pixels, all of those. So you can see from here to here is 20 pixels. If I double that to 40, that's 40 pixels. But again, if I want to convert that, I have to use I'm putting in the comment here because this is how it's best to remember it. So 40 pixel divided by 16 px. And that is going to give me 2.5 EM. So if I refresh it, we should have the same amount. We do. All right, so that is your text indent. Your text indent can also take values like percentages. So it can take a 10%. A 10%, if the parent is 300 pixels, it would be 30 pixels. So it all depends on whatever the parent value is. In our scenario, our parent of the P is this article. And we don't have anything specified, so it could be whatever the size that it is. And then again, if we want to remove inherited values, so for example, our P text right here is 2.5. Let's say that down here I have a class called my paragraph. And I specify that in here, P, my paragraph, I can say text indent. And I can say 0. Or I believe you can also use inherit. Yep. So we can say 0. And for that paragraph, it will remove it. So you can see that the paragraph here, it's lost its text indent by specifying it. Okay, we just talked about text align. Text align gives you the ability to make things center or whatever. So I have my H1 up here. I can say text align center, and text align center for politics is going to make it, it's going to center it to the center of the page. No matter where I squish this around to, it will remain centered. You have, as I showed a moment ago, you have some default values. You can use things like center, left, justify, right, and of course, inherit. Okay. Guys, any questions so far? We have just a couple more before we close class today. Any questions? Okay. Okay. Let's see here. Changing text case. Changing the text case gives us the ability to make something uppercase, right? So we'll just go into our text, we'll go into our H1 here, and we'll type text transform. Oops, I lost my value. There we go. Text transform, and we'll say capitalize. And what that should do is you should take the politics that we have here, and it should make it all caps. Why is it not working? Oh. Y'all should have caught that and told me I was wrong. All right, uppercase. There we go. So it changed the casing, transformed the casing there for us, right? You have different options here. You can type capitalize after the colon to put the first character of each word in uppercase. So capitalize when I was doing this a minute ago, capitalize is not going to change anything here because politics was already capitalized, right? The P was already capitalized. But if I change this to a lowercase p here, and now I refresh it, now it will make it capitalized. Now to demonstrate it again, I'll just take this out so you can see it. This should become a lowercase p now. There you go. I put it back in, makes it uppercase. So you have different options there. If you want to capitalize one letter, if you want to transform the entire text, you can as well make it lowercase, and then of course you can say none to take out the value. The other thing that you can use is the font variant property. And we didn't really talk about font variant earlier, but with font variant, if the font that you're using has a small caps version, then what it will do is it'll take the lowercase letters and it'll use a small capitalized version of it, right? So let me take out the text transform, and we're going to use the font variant, and we're going to say small caps. And I'm not sure if this font has a small caps, but let's just see. Yeah, it does. It has a small caps. So if we came back into our index HTML, we change this to a capital P, what you should see is the first letter is in the big font and the others are in the variant, right? With this, you have small caps and you have a variant of none. So kind of adds a little bit extra expressibility to your, to what you're doing. Okay. Keep in mind that if you use text transform uppercase, you're going to overwrite the ability of font variant small caps. It's going to conflict, okay? And then you have other things like text decoration. Text decoration is important, for example, with, you automatically see a text decoration when you use an anchor. So if I have an anchor called my home, let's put this up top so you can see it better because it won't show very well down below. This automatically has a text decoration, and the text decoration that it has is the underline. But with text decoration property as well, you can specify, for example, say you want your H1 to have a line through it. Well, now you can decorate the text with a strike through. Or say you want it to have, and these are all predefined values, by the way. You can't put in whatever you want. You could say overline. And of course, it puts the line above. Let's try something here. I'm not sure if it will take multiple values or not, but let's see what it does. Nope. Oh, well, I need to save it. There we go. No. Text decoration will only take one. And so remember, again, it follows the cascading rule. But you have different ones you can use there. You can use the line through, overline, underline, and so forth. As well as you can tell your anchor tags, you can specify the text decoration is none. And what that does is it'll take away the underline. Okay. So these are all very, very important pieces of things that you can do there. Okay. Last bit of detail here is setting white space. White space can be sometimes a tricky thing to manage. The white space property is useful if you have a word that should wrap. So let me give you an example. Let's say I come, let's see, Lorem dollars. Yeah, let's make this word here one word. Yeah. I'm going to refresh it. So this word now is very, very long, right? Let's make it even longer. You're like, Mr. Rogers, that's not a word. What are you doing? Well, none of it is. It's all gibberish. The standard way white spacing works is if it's all one word, it's not going to wrap, right? But you can do some things with white space where you can tell it to wrap or not wrap, right? So I'll go down here to my P element. We're going to say white space, and we'll say no wrap. So if we do that, you see what happens. Now it forces the scroll all the way out. Well, why would you ever want to do that, right? Well, maybe you have a piece of text in a window, you want to put scroll bars on it, and you want it to go all the way out and not go down to the next line. There's examples of different sites who do that. Like if you go to stackoverflow.com and you're looking at a particular code sample, they often do that. So white space over no wrap, that takes away the wrapping. You can say white space pre, right? Say white space pre. So what does white space pre give you? White space pre pretty much does the same thing. How about pre-line? Okay. You have, let's see here. Let me pull up the right syntax on this. So if you type pre, it's going to display all the spaces and return the original text, right? So if we type pre, all the spaces and return the original text. So that in this case is going to do a lot the same of what no wrap does. If we tell it normal, it's going to treat white space as usual. Now, when you're doing things with the white space, it's always a good idea to consider where you want your break lines. So if you think about a break line is something like this. Inside my PR, I have a, I have a break line, right? Just the break line tag. And if you look at what the break line tag will do, it's going to force that break line right there. Or if I put, let's see, put the break line somewhere else, it'll force that break line on that particular spot. All right, guys, that is it. We have pushed all the way through chapter 10. We've looked at the homework assignment, one of the many ways. And then Thursday, we're going to jump into chapter 11. And we are pushing very quickly through this textbook. With that said, one of the goals of this class is later on.
I have class.
I'm sorry?
I have another class.
All right. Well, you take care. With that said, later on, what we're going to be getting into is JavaScript and the last 3 or 4 weeks of class and how you can use that with your websites. Guys, if you got to go, I'll see you Thursday. Otherwise, you have questions, I'll be here for about another 5 minutes or so.